We're really glad that you're here tonight. It really means a lot to be together. And one of the ways that we create community is to really highlight some of the most important people and areas in our community. And tonight we get to hear about the history of our library. And Carmen, we're so excited to have you here tonight. And I'm going to introduce you in just a moment here. But we're going to hear about the Woodsides, the past and the present, and what's happening now. And so very excited about this. If you would turn your cell phones off or put them on silent or give them to me, and I'm happy to take them if you're tempted. No, but just so you know, there's treats on the side if your blood sugar goes down. There's some cookies and some food over there. But we're really excited about tonight. You're going to hear all kinds of wonderful things about our library, and especially from Carmen, who has been the manager of both Portola Valley's library and our library here. So let's give a big hand for Carmen right now. She comes on.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining me, and thank you especially to the Arts and Culture Committee for inviting me. This is not the first time I've been in this room to talk. I usually come for town council meetings and I do a presentation, but this is entirely different, and you guys gave me the option to do whatever I wanted, so I decided why not present on the history of the library. And as I was doing the history of the library, I realized actually we're coming upon a very important centennial for the library. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing now in the future. But a little bit about me, if you don't know me, I've been the manager for Portola Valley and Woodside Libraries for, I think, 3 years now. I'm looking at Marie, she's like, yeah, that sounds right. But I've been with San Mateo County Libraries for 10 years in October. And I started as a children's librarian in San Carlos. I then went on to Half Moon Bay Library. I was there during the first 2 years of the pandemic. And then I went to North Fair Oaks Library. That's where I became a manager. And after about 3 years there, I transferred over to Portola Valley and Woodside. People sometimes ask me why I've moved around a lot. I think I'm restless and I like to experience things. But most of all, my father-in-law, his name is Charlie Adams. He has been a longtime Portola Valley resident, and they told me they really want me to go and manage their library. So as an added bonus, I also get Woodside Library. So, but yes, so I'm a Spanish speaker. I love to read mysteries. Right now I'm reading God of the Woods, about a third of the way, and I really like it. But enough about me, because you're here to hear about the history. And if I'm reading from a script, it's because there's so much to say about the Woodside Library. So I will do a little bit of show and tell as I'm speaking. And I'll also reference some of the items that I have on the table. So my goal is to get through this presentation within about 30 minutes. And that way you guys can come up and look through all the photo albums, and you can ask myself and Mark and Marie. Well, Mark has been with us for a long time at Portola Valley, so you can ask him Portola Valley things. But Marie has been at Woodside for quite a while, about 10 years. No, 9 years. 8? 20, that's right, it's 20. It's 20 years. I was like, I remember there was an anniversary. But yes, so the story of the Woodside Library starts in the old schoolhouse. You see pictured here, though it's several decades later after the original schoolhouse. So there was a meeting of the Woodside Library Association that was called December 30th, 1858. On this day, the association decided on a constitution, and I have a copy of that association and the constitution. And they basically agreed that we, the undersigned, being desirous of formation of an association for the purchase of books, maps, charts, and for the preservation of works of art, plants, and minerals of our own and other states, and for the diffusion of useful knowledge by lecturers, do agree to the following constitution. And where was that library? Well, some of you might know that it was on a shelf in the Tripp store. And this is a picture taken by me about 2 weeks ago. I went into the store and I saw that they have like a little dedicated bookshelf. I don't know that that's where it was originally, but that's where it is right now. So the books were stored there on a shelf at the general store, and there's a picture of the store as it was about that time. So by January 8th, so a couple weeks later, 1859, 190 books had been purchased, and the collection would eventually grow to 589 books. Titles that were in high circulation from this collection included The Arabian Nights, Swiss Family Robinson, the complete works of Shakespeare, Aesop's Fables, and I have a couple of those books here. Not the originals, but, published several decades later. The subscription-based libraries were they were really the norm for libraries back in the 1850s. There really weren't any free libraries. You would have to pay a subscription fee. In this case, each member paid 25 cents a month, and they borrowed amongst themselves all out of Tripp's store. The presence of a free library in San Mateo County wouldn't actually be seen until the 1880s. That was with San Mateo and Redwood City and Burlingame, but I talk about that a little bit later. But Woodside has the historical footnote of being the first library in San Mateo County of any kind. So even though it was a paid subscription-based organization, it was still the first library that a member of the public, could pay into. And so what was the library like back then? Well, it was a logging community, as many of you know. The members of the Woodside Library Association were lawyers, teachers, landowners, skilled tradesmen, business owners. They lived in a very rural community that did not have easy access to educational materials, as opposed to Redwood City, for example. Doesn't seem that far away, but it was when you don't have a car. Neighbors were very far apart, and Tripp's store was the central location for these neighbors to meet and exchange books and ideas. So who were the members? I have somebody very carefully and dedicatedly transcribed the handwritten membership and the circulation records, which you can look through, I think back in the 60s. I think it was part of a school project of theirs. But I took a picture of one such member. So they were not all men. There were, I believe, 2 or 3 women. And Barthenia Brown was a school teacher. So her first book was checked out January 19th, a couple of weeks after it was formed. And the association closed around 1860. So you could see that she was an avid reader. She read quite a bit. And the other woman was her mother. So they were both members. Barthenia was the first school teacher of Woodside. She was married to George, who was a wheelwright. It was the first library of any kind in San Mateo County. And by 1872, the association dissolved as the number of members dropped down to 12. Tripp was no longer interested in keeping the books on his shelves because they were not circulating. They were just taking up space and dust and spiders. So it was decided by John Greer that the books would be dispersed amongst the remaining members of the association. So between 1872 and 1927, there was no library in Woodside. So there's a bit of a dark period there. And before I go into 1927 and how the library came to be, I have to give a little bit of a backstory, so we're going to detour. And I'm going to talk about Harriet Eddy and James L. Gillis. So Harriet Eddy was a library pioneer. They called her, I believe her official title was a library organizer. And James L. Gillis was one of our state librarians. So the main architect of the county free library system was James Gillis. He was the state librarian from 1899 to 1917. He was a strong believer of libraries, public libraries, and during this very progressive time in California, he stood out from his predecessors in the desire to systemize public library services and professionalize the library education and training. So before that, it really wasn't professionalized. If you loved books and you were fairly good at organizing, you would be a custodian, which is what they called librarians back then. But he wanted to create a library school, and so he did, out of the state library. And around this time, he hired Harriet Eddy, who was not a custodian. She was actually a teacher and an educator. He hired her in the role of library organizer in 1909 because he had a dream, a plan of creating a county-free library, which had already happened in other parts of the United States, and he was inspired to bring that to California. So between 1909 and 1918, with the enthusiasm and dedication of a real activist, Eddie went to all 58 California counties and organized 40 free county libraries. She traveled by railroad, boat, stagecoach, horseback, and automobile. She had been a high school principal and established the first free library, which was in Sacramento. It was the Elk Grove library system, where she was the teacher and then later principal. And that's how James Gillis came to know her, and that's why he hired her, because he really admired her ability to organize, and that's what he needed. He knew that she'd be up to the challenge, and so her career in libraries kind of ended after that organization, but she did go on to do other things. And if you wanted to check out her biography, there's a little biography here that a person wrote, and her memoirs are also somewhere here on this table. Oh, right there. So how do you create a county free library? That's a good question. Let's see. So essentially what she was tasked to do is she was tasked to go to the Board of Supervisors of all these counties and tell them the steps that you needed to do that, which is to pass a resolution to create a county-free library system. You would have to fund it in some way. For the city libraries like Redwood City and San Mateo, it was a city tax that funded their services. But if you wanted library services, for example, in Woodside or La Honda, you would have to create a tax levy, a county tax levy to fund those. And that's how we're funded still, partially through a county tax levy. So she would go to these Board of Supervisors, she would present the plan, tell them how to do this, and also that they had to hire a librarian. So at this time, the cities that had already secured funding for their own libraries were San Mateo and Redwood City and Burlingame. But when Harriet came down to San Mateo County, she was really promoting library services to everyone. So down from the coast, Woodside, all the way up to Daly City and things like that. So for 10 years, as she served as a library organizer, she also not just spoke to the supervisors, but also community stakeholders. And this is an excerpt from one of her memoirs where she talked about how she did that for San Mateo County. And I thought it was kind of funny because, you know, it really paints a picture of what she was working with here. It was a very rural area. There weren't a lot of roads for automobiles. Apparently, she wasn't happy with the hotels here. So she would have to go to San Francisco if she was advocating for the North End or Palo Alto for the South End. But she wrote a little bit about Woodside and talked about it being like the horse and buggy days, and just she went door to door talking to the community about the importance of having a free library for everyone. And I found this picture of the main street of Half Moon Bay. So I'm imagining her getting out of the buggy and running into the first person she sees, and they're like, just walk down the street. That's who you should talk to. And so that's what she did for 10 years by herself. And she accomplished quite a bit during that time. So when you know, she's advocating for library services for everyone, she's literally talking about everyone. This is the picture of the Hotel La Honda, taken about 1900s. And, you know, residents from La Honda, Woodside, they would have to travel quite far to get books from, even from Redwood City. It was quite a distance, especially if you are working constantly and don't have the means to get there on your own. So I found an article about the establishment of it. So actually, Harriet Eddy, I believe, managed to pass this, I want to say in 1912. But you might see in this article December 18th, 1915. So it actually took quite a few years for the county to go from agreeing to pass a tax levy and creating a resolution for a county-free library to actually doing it. So once she left and was able to pass this in 1912, she continued advocating to other counties, and she left it to stakeholders and friends that she made here to continue advocating for the supervisors to actually make it happen. So 3 years later, it did. And I found this article, and the first county librarian or first library director was Ann Bell Bailey. She was appointed by the Board of Supervisors on December 1915. And the article talks a little bit about what is a county free library. The idea and scheme of the county library is to place reading matter in the hands of everyone in the county, whether in small towns or in remote districts where heretofore library service had been practically unattainable. So branches are established in localities where the greatest number of people can be served from one point. And these branch books are sent from the main office. I'll talk a little bit about the main office, but that was in Redwood City. So the Redwood City Courthouse was the main library for quite a while. Now the county office, as we call it now, is on Tower Road, so up in San Mateo. But back then, it was on the second floor of the courthouse and eventually also the basement. And this is a picture of when it was in the basement. And that little flag there, I have a blow-up picture of the logo. So that's the original logo for the county free library system. Not just for San Mateo County, just for all of the county free libraries. That was the logo. So you see that pop up again and again. And I found these pictures in our county, in our records at the main office and our current library director's office, and I couldn't quite place that. So I'm thinking that's probably the courthouse. So that's probably the second floor, and then maybe also the basement, because the floors look different and the ceiling looks a little different. So that's what I'm imagining that those what two pictures are. And I'm pretty sure that the lady at the front desk was Clara Dills, so one of our library directors. So the first library director, Ann Bell Bailey, she opened 10 county branches that first year in 1915. It was Daly City, Half Moon Bay, La Honda, Menlo Park, Montera, Pescadero, San Bruno, San Carlos, the county farm, which I had to look up. I didn't know what that was. But some of you might recognize that, which doesn't exist anymore. And the courthouse. So pictured here is the courthouse. And Ann Bell Bailey retired in 1920, so she was only in that role for about 5 years. And she was succeeded by another librarian, Edna Holroyd. And then she got married and she went off to honeymoon and travel the world. So she resigned in 1930. And then we got Clara Dills. So Clara Dills is who you see here. And she was the county librarian for 23 years. So it was under her leadership that we see a boom in library services and expansion. And then when Dills died, when she retired, she died shortly after. Virginia Ross was our next county librarian between 1954 and 1974. So also another longtime librarian. And I'm going to talk about them. You'll see their names pop up as I present. But Virginia Ross also was the librarian when we built what was then the new library, what is now not so new, but still very beloved. So again, we see that logo here. This is not San Mateo County. This is actually in Santa Cruz. So Harriet Eddy and James Gillis, that's James Gillis right there, worked very hard to get a county-free library system in Santa Cruz. And I shared this picture because that's the logo again, which you see. We all had the same logo. And I'm pretty sure this lady is Edna Holroyd, who would have been our second library director. So I have a picture. Oh, yeah, here it is. I'll skip forward here. This was the library school that James L. Gillis started. So a lot of these early library directors were pupils of his as he started to professionalize the profession of librarian. So Edna worked very closely with him, and that's why she became our second director. He recommended her. So I talked a little bit about the Redwood City Courthouse being the main library. We borrowed all the materials from there, and these were the branches. So, and this was like an onion paper type written record that was in my library director's office, and I didn't want to scan it because I thought I would rip it. So we took a picture of it, and that's why it doesn't look too great. But you can see where all of the original locations were. So I believe when I took this picture, it was the libraries between 1946 and 1947. So Belmont was at their city hall. East Palo Alto was in a school ground in a portable building. The main library in Redwood City was in a store building. And Woodside isn't listed there because they called it a small station. So those were the bigger branches, and the small station, you can see Woodside's on the bottom, and it's the room of an old hotel. So that's how I know that that piece of paper was taken around that time, because it was in the old hotel. The reference books were also sent to different county departments. So basically, county center, which was in the courthouse, would mail out these boxes of 50 books at a time to the different branches, and then they would keep them for a certain period of time and send them back, and that's how they rotated the collection. So there's always been a history of rotating and revolving a collection with our county libraries. Even La Honda had a small store, and I have a picture of La Honda right there. So a very small station, yeah. So there's the logo right there. The tiny little shelf in that little storefront. It's not there anymore. But I thought that picture was really nice and crisp, so I shared it. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna go back to Woodside. That was my little detour of how the county free library came to be. So 1915 to 1927, the libraries are forming, the county free library branches are forming. We now have Edna Holroyd as our library director, and we go back to the old schoolhouse where a bunch of the residents of Woodside during a PTA meeting decided they needed a library branch too. So they decided the library branch would live there at the schoolhouse for the time being. So between 1927 and 1946, the collection would remain there, and it was staffed by a custodian, as what the librarians were called back then, and volunteers. So pay for these early custodians would have been between $10 to $15 a month, and they did not always get paid on time or at all. Usually they did, but this was a big struggle. Some of the papers that I went through with Clara Dills, and even some of the research I did with Edna Holroyd, the biggest struggle that they had was making sure that their custodians would get paid, because there was always a struggle on making sure to advocate the importance of the position. So the other part that was a struggle for them is, what was going on in the world between 1945 and 1946? It was a pretty big part of U.S. history, and many women were finding other places of employment that paid more than $10 to $15 a month. So not only were we competing with getting educated and qualified women to be custodians, but we couldn't promise them pay on a regular basis. So it was also very difficult to recruit them. But that being said, the circulation of the schoolhouse library between 1945 and 1946 was over 1,271 books, which is pretty decent for that time. So what happened after 1946? The library was popular and it needed to get bigger. So we moved to the Woodside Inn, which I believed at that point had been owned by the Newman family. And it wasn't a hotel anymore. I believe it was already closed. But he let them have a small part of that hotel. That didn't last very long. The building was old and it was condemned in 1948. So we needed to open a new library again. So between 1949 to 1962, that's a drawing, but that's the picture. I'll go back to it. We moved to the old Newman building, which was at 125 Low Road. It was bigger. However, it had mice and a leaky roof, and it was very difficult to heat in the winter. It was only open 2 nights a week and 3 afternoons per week. But that's the picture. So you can see in the picture, it says Woodside Branch, San Mateo County Free Library. Okay, so then what happened? Well, the librarians got tired of the leaky roof and of the mice because that room used to be, I believe, a hay storage. So that's why the mice were there. And also the circulation just increased, and the public Woodside residents wanted a bigger library. They wanted more hours. Children especially were using the library quite often, and there just was no space for the children in this tiny little space. So Virginia Ross was the county director at that time. So she said, okay, let's find you a bigger place. really the goal was to get a permanent location, but the turnaround time was too soon for that. So in 1962, I don't know how many of you know this, but the library was located on 3060 Woodside Road, which is sort of where Bucks is, but at the very end of the building. Somewhere in there, there was an expansion of the building and certain parts were rearranged. So I don't think the address of 3060 exists anymore, but somewhere where that was the library. And this is an old picture of that. But we paid $150 a month to rent that location. It was a pretty good bargain. So, and really Virginia Ross says here in this article, it's strictly temporary because they wanted to find a permanent location. So this is the search for the new home, and it was really brought on by the town. The residents wanted a permanent location, and so they went to the town council, and the town council created the library site committee in the 1960s. And the sole purpose of the library site committee was to look for a site. And different ideas were put to the table. So an early idea was where the horse art statues are. This was before the horses were installed, obviously, but you're looking at what is now Roberts. And I forget what that building used to be. The phone exchange, yeah. So they wanted to, at this time, the phone exchange was closing. And so they wanted to donate that triangle strip of land to be the library, but that didn't come to be. For one reason or other, they decided that wasn't what they wanted to happen. So then they found a different land, and I believe a person on 2040 Mountain Home Road, the Zabin property, wanted to sell the land to the library site committee for the library. And this was a heated topic in 1966 because more than 100 residents jammed the town planning commission in the school library to protest it. And it wasn't because they didn't want a library, it was because they didn't feel that was the appropriate spot for it. So they met a couple of times. The issue splits the town. This is in April. And there's even a quote here from Phoebe Hearst Cook, which is funny, protesting that it's just not a good location. So I think they give up on that by May or June, and the library site committee just goes back to the drawing board and they find a new location, which is where we are now, 3140 Woodside Road. And that was, I believe, from the Bonifant family, yeah. And so they negotiated the purchase of that property for $40,000. But once they located it, they needed to fundraise to purchase the land. So that's when the Friends of the Library came to be. It was born out of the library site committee. So some of the members of the library site committee were also Friends of the Library later. And their original purpose was to fundraise for that $40,000. And so here we have an architectural drawing. I believe this is in 1967 when they finally agree to purchase the land. They get an architect to draw the plans, who was a local Woodside resident. His name was Thomas Whitson. He also worked for the Planning Commission for the county. So he was a very well-known architect. Construction began in 1968. So here things move along quite quickly. So 1967, it was purchased. 1968, the building begins, and we start to see the formation of the Friends. We talk a little bit, we start to see a little bit of who those early Friends were. So Dorothy A. Hill was the first president, and Mrs. August S. Klein was the secretary. And we see their pictures here as well. There was a membership fee, which I believe was 25-cent junior membership and a $25 patron membership. So all of that was to fundraise for the library. And here we have Dorothy here, pictured singly. And then this other picture is Mrs. August Klein and the county librarian, Miss Virginia Ross. And so I'm telling you, things are moving along quite quickly. Everyone was excited to get this library on the road again. So 1968, the month of December 1968, so barely a year, 2 years of construction, they start moving materials from that 3060 Woodside temporary location to what is now the current library. So here they are in December, happily moving materials. And the very first library program happened. So the ground opening was December 26th, the day after Christmas. But the very first library program began Monday, January 20th, and that was a story time. So, yeah. But we have a dedication that happens later in the year. So April 20th, 1969, that was the grand dedication, and you see the flyer there. So I have in these binders up in front of me, because I'm coming close to my end here, pictures of those early friends, the newspaper clippings of the uproar of the new library. I have pictures of their first friends' book sales and stuff like that. So I don't know who put them together. They were lovingly put together. They live on the shelf at the Woodside Library, so if you don't get a chance to see them tonight, you can look at them tomorrow tomorrow, I'm working tomorrow, when I put them back on the shelf. I didn't want to miss talking about the native plant garden, though it's part of the library, but also not part of the library. We're kind of joint partners in this because there's the Woodside Atherton Garden Association. And pictured here is Timmy Gallagher, Mrs. Gallagher, and she was instrumental in getting the library garden there. So I found this really funny article about it. I'll read it really quickly. In 1970, says club president Timmy Gallagher, the Planning Commission was working on plans for a new library, which had more land than the library building could put to use. And she says, I was upset. In the discussions, they were just going to fence off the back of the property. It would be a great place for teenagers to hide out and smoke and so on. So she got the county and the city and the garden club to agree to her idea of establishing a native plant garden. And so there we have it. I thought that was quite funny. So now I'm going to kind of fast forward to some pictures that I found that I really liked. But this is librarian Pat Ward. So this was when the library first opened, probably was that December or January. So early pictures of the Woodside Library at grand opening. That's how it originally looked. And then you can see through the window, there was no garden. So how did the library do? Well, in the month of April of that year of grand opening, the previous year, circulation had been about 2,073 items. And you might recall that a couple years even before that, the circulation was about 1,000. So at grand opening by April, the circulation was 4,554. So it was just skyrocketing. They went through 5,083 books and magazines in April alone, compared to 3,917 a year ago. Yeah, so Woodside has always been great readers there. And these are pictures from the 1970s. So some of you might recall that the parking lot has changed a bit. That's the original version of it. In the 80s, there was a recarpeting project, so we have some people hard at work. That clock, I guess, is an original feature of the library. And you see the service desk right there, but then in this next picture, I'm going to show you, there's that clock again, and there's no service desk. So we've done a little bit of rearranging. The patio was also much bigger than what it was now. We actually, in about 10 years ago, we built out that patio to make the library a little bit bigger. So the garden club, that looks very different. This isn't the garden club. This was the puppet show in the garden, but that looks different. Yeah, the service desk is not there. The library, the bathrooms are a little bit different. And then in the middle of the library was this children's area that's not there anymore. The children's have their own corner. This is the back patio, and that horse artwork is actually now on the other wall. And where those two ladies are sitting on the chairs, that's actually our periodicals are there. So this is all completely different. That's a picture I took last year. So there's the horse picture, you can see, on opposite wall. And so we're still in the news. This was an article from, I think, last year. Yeah, March 2025. They were interviewing me for Paws for Tales. So we have the Humane Society come and kids read to the dogs. And so the library still makes some really good news, feel good news. And we go out in the community now. So those were our two interns this summer, Maddie and Henry. And once a month in the summer and sometimes in the winter, we'll go to Kenyatta College during their second harvest event, which is every Tuesday. And we'll give out books and we'll talk to people about library services. We also have a partnership with the Friends of Wonder Lake and Huddart Park. And this is at Wonder Lake Park, and we were doing an embroidery workshop there. So sometimes we do our workshops out into the community because we just want to expose our community to other parts of Woodside. And it's not a horse, but a donkey. Maybe it's a mini horse behind him, though. So we had the Caring Cowgirl come, what was that, in June, Marie, maybe? Yeah, and she did a story time. So libraries are still a very important part of both children's and adults' lives here at Woodside. We had a big summer adventure program that's just now concluding, but in the back where Mark is, he's raising his hand. We have some free books for kids and adults as well. And we also have some flyers for still some more summer adventure events that we have for kids and families. And I think this is my last, yeah, it's my last slide. So I wanted to share this little snippet of what summer adventure used to look like. And so this was Clara Dill. She wrote a lot for that, not just the Almanac. I think it was the Redwood City Tribune. So the summer adventure program she was sharing there was older boys and girls are invited to make a Bookland world tour this summer. Make-believe passports are given to each child who participates. Each will list on his passport the books he has read on foreign countries, and the flag showing his name is pinned in the large world map in his branch library. Oh, and that was Miss Virginia Ross when she was the assistant county librarian who made that. So I thought I wanted to conclude with the final thought that, over the years, library services may look different, but they really haven't changed. We're still here for people to come and find their own adventures amongst the stories on our shelves, and for children to discover a love of reading and learning. And that was the original intention of the Woodside Library Association in the 1850s, and we're still doing that today. So I thought that was a lot of fun to discover when I was doing this presentation. And then on this table are pictures of the Woodside Library and articles over the years, starting from the 60s through the 90s. And then I have the Woodside Library Association's membership and their circulation records here. And somebody in the 70s, to get their library science degree, wrote a thesis on the history of Woodside Library. So I have a copy of it here.
Oh, that's really neat.
Harriet Eddy's memoirs, and I photocopied the part where she talked about San Mateo County here. I also have a very early version of what a San Mateo County free library book looked like. So this is the history of San Mateo County, written by Roy Cloud. If you don't know who Roy Cloud is, there's a school in Redwood City named after him, but he was a superintendent. He was a very important superintendent. And he wrote a 2-volume history of San Mateo County. But I didn't bring it because of him. I brought it because it was one of the oldest books we have still circulating. And it shows our original stamp, which is San Mateo County Free Library in Redwood City. It was part of the California collection. So this book originally lived in the county courthouse library building, and it was lent out to the different libraries. And there's even a fun little handwriting here of the librarian who cataloged it, how much it cost, I think, which was maybe $20. And it was put into the circulation in January 1931. So this was the oldest copy of a book I still found that has a barcode on it, that can still be checked out. Technically not, we don't want it to leave the library. I borrowed that from Half Moon Bay, so I have to give it back to them. I promised I wouldn't lose it.
Yeah. I'm glad. I was going to ask you to give us little highlights up here.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this? You're going to get some time to come on up. Let me just give you a few things here. You can see this presentation on YouTube, probably on Monday. And so I encourage you to take a look at it and really take some time to look at the slides when you're there, because I really, there's such interesting things that you provided for us. So Carmen, thank you so much. Next month, we have the a cappella singers called the Baritones, and they're going to be wonderful. It's going to be a great music here, and we hope you'll join us. So grab a flyer on the way out. There are free books. Mark, thank you for bringing the book. San Mateo County and Portola
Yes.
and Woodside providing those books. Please take some books. We want you to do that. I think it's interesting that the library would say, please take our books.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
take them, keep
that's
them.
a great thing. So yeah, thank you for that. Tom, who's usually does this part, he gives a quote, and I want to use Ray Bradbury, who said that libraries are vital for preserving our past and securing our future. And I would add that every child, every person that enters a library sits between those two things.
Yeah.
And enters in where the world is at their disposal, their imagination all met. I just think it's such a wonderful gift to have a great library. So thank you. Here's what we want you to do. Please get some food, please get some books, and please say hello to Carmen and take a look.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for coming tonight, everybody. We'll see you next month.